Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and in this video we're going to be taking a look at the patch 6.21 patch notes for Final Fantasy XIV. There's some fairly controversial things in this, and some things that caught me at least a little bit off guard, but we're going to take a look nice and quick. As a reminder, patch 6.25 is going to be when we get a bunch of new content. Variant dungeons, Criterion dungeons, Manderville weapons, the actual next Manderville quest, and the Omicron tribal quest. Those will all be in patch 6.25, and I'm currently predicting that that will be October 18th. Could be a week or two later, but that's at least like a good guesstimation at this point. Moving forward, they start with just apparently there was an illumination error with the pendant wall light furnishing. I don't do much housing stuff, so I wouldn't have noticed, but okay, that's fixed. And then we get into job adjustment. So I was actually kind of surprised that this patch had job adjustments, not because it wasn't possible in any way or it completely broke any norm that they have, but they normally don't have such swift responses to imbalances. It's just not something they've shown us before. And I do agree with the adjustments that they've made here, or at least the jobs they've decided to target. Specifically, Paladin and Warrior. Now, I know some of you were expecting some changes to other jobs, but let's get through these first, and then I'll talk about why I'm fairly certain no other jobs got any adjustments at all. For Paladin, they decided to largely buff their Requiescat window and Expiation, which is a pretty nice buff. It's 420 potency, just plays, twice a minute. And that's significant, especially given that the ability itself is AoE, so that's even going to just bump up their dungeon kills. But I mean, most of this stuff will. Holy Spirit, an extra 40 potency. Obviously, you're going to be using that inside of all of your Requiescat windows. I do wonder if the extra 20 potency leads to any weird cursed tech. I always wonder if the mains have like something up their sleeve when I see certain adjustments, but hopefully it just means the Requiescat window is stronger. Confiteor, an extra 100 potency. That's pretty big, actually. And then Blade of Faith, another 20. Blade of Truth, another 20. So, I mean, most of that stuff, again, is targeting the Requiescat window, which means them aligning with buffs should be significantly stronger. I don't know if that means Paladins are going to have to change the way they do their openers to ensure that these abilities fall specifically within the raid buff period. I know Paladins talk about having a very strict rotation, and this could mean that falling out of that alignment feels even more punishing, or maybe it'll feel less punishing because at least your stuff's a little stronger. But you really want to get the values added from those buffs that your team is providing even more now that these skills hit harder. And I think that's what they were going for, giving them a little bit more 2-minute buff oomph, although they get to do this every minute, so they'll feel better all the time. For Warrior, they went after Storm's Path, Storm's Eye, Fellcleave, and Upheaval. Very frequently used skills. They didn't go after things like their inner release Primal Rend or after infuriated inner chaoses. They went for abilities that are used more frequently. You'll always be using your eye combo to get your buff longer whenever you need to. You'll always be using your path combo to make sure that you can generate extra gauge. You'll always be trying to use Upheaval every 30 seconds. And when you have the gauge to use it, you'll pretty much always be using Fellcleave, as long as you're not pooling it for any sort of specific burst window. So this should be a considerable upgrade on top of the things they just did to Warrior a couple of weeks ago. But these are the two tanks and the two jobs I think that needed adjustments the most. Of all of the roles, the difference between Gunbreaker and Dark Knight versus Paladin and Warrior, probably one of the hottest discussions that has happened with job imbalances this patch, and something that needed to be adjusted more readily than anything else. The reason why I say that, because I know some of you are thinking about Machinist, some of you are thinking about Red Mage, or maybe even Reaper still, is that the imbalance that we have on those is kind of hard to judge because the majority of people do not have gear evenly distributed across all of those jobs and roles. The melee very likely were funneled a lot of gear, maybe Black Mage, but Red Mages, Machinists, even the ranged physicals, very few of those were likely funneled gear. And so we don't really know exactly how it's going to stack up against each other when we're talking about full BIS and full, just normal raid comps that aren't like specifically funneled towards a party member. So it's still a question mark. So if those jobs do get adjustments, you would more likely see them in .x5, or in this case, .25 patches, than you would expect to see them in something like a .21. That's what I think, but obviously feel free to disagree. Now, you might be thinking, well, yeah, but these are DPS jobs, so that extra DPS that they could get theoretically, we shouldn't be thinking about when they get 630 and whatnot, because they need to be able to beat the DPS check on the most recent Savage fight now. Well, we have a different solution for that, apparently, because for the first time, and I think since Midas? A tier has been nerfed mid-relevancy. The HP of Hephaestus in Abyssos 8th Circle Savage has been reduced. And they explain the reasoning, and I'll read that before I get into my own thoughts on it. Reasoning for HP adjustment. In our endeavor to create an encounter more challenging than Asphodelos, the 4th Circle Savage, the team responsible for final adjustment spent a great deal more time than usual working on balance for this raid battle. Under normal circumstances, the DPS of this team serve as a base for determining a boss HP value that results in clears as close to the time limit as possible. However, as extra time was dedicated to testing this battle, the team's overall performance proved to be higher than usual. As a result, the base values used for adjustments were too high, with final values roughly 1% higher than intended. We have reduced the boss's HP to bring the battle in line with our initial battle projections. We apologize for any inconvenience caused. So there's a couple of things to take away from this. Number one, the dev team's QA team, specifically the team that tests Savage and Ultimate level content, is getting a little too good at the game because they thought this was a perfectly acceptable amount of DPS in order to require of players week 1. And to be fair, as strict as that DPS check was for a lot of people, it's also one that people overcame in about the expected time. The second tier is normally like a 30 to 35 hour tier, so those upper echelon players cleared it in still about the same period of time. Now, that's not universal across all of the upper echelon players, but it is something that is a relative norm. We had clears filtering in throughout all of Wednesday into Thursday, and that's pretty normal. Now, the volume of clears was still way lower than usual, and I think that is indicative of what this actually ended up affecting. It was the people who were even 90% or 80% or just playing a little bit more below what the maximum capabilities of their jobs actually were, or any player like that likely causing a bit of a rift between the teams that were actively competing or just actively trying to complete the tier. So it's very interesting to hear just how comfortable they got and how much more they played this, and it's going to lead to some interesting discussions about how they balance tiers going forward, because this is something they likely can't let happen again. However, it's also had a rippling effect on the raid community. There is a 100% chance anyone who is going for World Prog in any Savage tier going forward, at least until people feel comfortable again, will be required to do split clears week 1 to ensure there are no shenanigans. The only way that doesn't happen is if teams feel confident while they are progressing that there's nothing DPS wise stopping them, but they will almost certainly make sure that all of their members are capable of instantly going, okay, we're wasting time doing this because we're just barely falling short on this one thing. We should go do splits real quick so we can pump out the rest. It's at least got to be a card in their back pocket so that they know when they're ready to go. As are my personal feelings about this, I don't really think I'm a fan. I think they could have left it as its strict check that it was, because while I do think it was causing a lot of headaches and a lot of rifts, I do think we haven't really had a Savage level encounter that forces players to drastically improve an aspect of their play like this in quite some time. Now, mechanically, Hephaestus is not that difficult. It has a bit of a puzzle aspect to the second phase, something that's fairly normal, but it's also one of those things that once it's been solved, it's easy enough to convey all that information back to people, and it becomes significantly easier for the people who come after the world first, second, third, etc., etc. And then the first phase doesn't really have any mechanics that are too out of the ordinary or difficult. In fact, it's a fight that's incredibly friendly to melee DPS, and if anything, too unfriendly to caster DPS who don't have a complete grasp on every single movement that they need to do, especially during week 1 of Prog, which can be the most stressful time to try to figure those things out, but also the most pertinent time. I would prefer they have left it as is, at least for another several weeks, because people are getting more loot. People are learning to improve in their rotations. They're better. People are dying less. There's improvements being made amongst groups, amongst Party Finder, that I think are generally for the better for Final Fantasy XIV's raid scene. But I also know how much trouble this has been causing. And the thing is, it's not even just this. This is like a component that has kind of exposed cracks in a lot of players' thinking or players' confidence and whatnot, that is leading to a bit of burnout and a bit of just stepping away from the game. I already know several people who've just stopped progging because they don't want to experience this fight anymore, because a slight error would lead to a wipe, or a slight error would lead to a failed DPS check, or, you know, they weren't getting enough time in the second phase, etc. I've seen all sorts of reasons around there. I personally would have preferred they just leave it as is, since we are getting the more gear. But totally respect the fact that they are doing this as well, because they clearly did overshoot with the extra gear. It shouldn't have been the way that it was. It shouldn't have even been remotely close, even with the 1% more difficult check than they intended. But there's a deeper discussion to be had here. Stuff about the game and the way it's designed now that compounded these issues. Things that are not clear or mentioned, or something even a regular player would even notice. I think we probably need to have a long discussion about that and really provide some feedback to the team, depending on where you stand regarding those different aspects. And that is definitely a standalone video that we need to do all on its own. Hell, that's what standalone means. Duh, idiot. Talking to myself. Anyway, it's easier now, so go beat its ass. So on top of that, there is Echo in Asphodello Savage now, and they did a bunch of bug fixes. Some of these things I have seen happen. For example, the Dragoon thing with the right eye. If their left eye target is incapacitated, they just lose the buff overall. Very not cool. Animals being outside their pasture, animals not appearing when they're supposed to. That's, you know, the timed animals on the Island Sanctuary. Workshop and Granary not functioning as intended. I've never seen that happen. The index being accessed outside of the Island Sanctuary. Not functional, but maybe the data load actually causes issues on the main servers, so that could be the reason for that. Nameplates showing and or displaying in situations where they shouldn't be. Okay. Being teleported around your island when you enter an instant studio or log out of the game in the Sanctuary. Certain achievements that could not be earned despite meeting the requirements. That's that one happened to me. I earned my Trader of Paradise title last week. I got over 17,000, but I did it on the very last craft from my workshop for the week, and it didn't give me the title. This week, I didn't take any chances. I made Monday my off day and completed it yesterday, but now nobody should run into that issue overall, in theory. And then there's just a bunch of other things. People's games crashing if their glamour dresser was full when they used the iSearch command. Certain NPCs not trading certain things. Certain orchestrion roles being swapped somehow. Displays for some glammed gear. Portraits, a few issues with the release of the portraits with dynamic resolution. Just a few other little things here that I feel like aren't as impactful, but, you know, not something to completely ignore either. Just not of much interest to me. But anyway, that's going to be a wrap for patch 6.21's patch notes. Be sure to let me know what you thought in the comment section of the video below. And stay tuned. I promise I'm going to get back to my regular content schedule. And I have a very, I have an in-depth video about what's been going on over on my side. I'm sure there's been like rumors or either misinformation or whatnot of, you know, things that have occurred. I've talked about it on my weekly Q&A, but I want to make a standalone video both on my thoughts on the raid tier as well as what was going on and why my schedule has been so absolutely fucked the last few weeks. So thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.